This is crazy, but good for democracy, I guess. Donald Trump delivered a speech in Atlanta, Georgia, and he just sabotaged himself, needlessly put his own campaign in jeopardy in the state of Georgia. And it's not just me saying that. Mediaite reports, quote, Trump may have just lost Georgia. GOP leaders reportedly infuriated by bat-esque crazy MAGA rally in key swing states. So he held this rally. I'll show you some clips. In this segment, we're focusing on his attacks against the governor of Georgia. Just a very politically strange thing to do when you're campaigning in that state and that governor, despite my feelings about him, is popular. And we'll talk about why Trump is so upset with Brian Kemp. But that's what we'll address in this segment. In a different segment, we'll probably get on to other parts from the same speech. But so many crazy things, and I don't think it was attended quite as much as Trump wanted it to be. But let's dive right into this. A bunch of clips. Again, Brian Kemp didn't go along with Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. And while that's sort of the lowest bar, it does make Brian Kemp less hardcore MAGA. And that's something that infuriates Trump. He wants complete loyalty to the point where even if he loses an election in your state, you should pretend like and work to facilitate a fraudulent victory. Here is Trump in Georgia.
Your governor, Kemp, and Raffensperger are doing everything possible to make 2024 difficult for Republicans to win. What are they doing? I don't know. They got something in mind, they got a little something in mind. Kemp is very bad for the Republican Party. He wouldn't do anything. We have Burt Jones over here. We have Burt Jones. All he wanted in the Senate was to have a special resolution passed, and it was all done. Every senator wanted it. Every Republican wanted it. And we have Senator Beach here someplace, too. Where is Senator Beach? Oh, I can't forget him. We can't forget him. A warrior. A warrior.
So, again, referencing after Trump lost the 2020 election, Brian Kemp, along with the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, said, no, sorry, Donnie, we're not going to unilaterally overthrow the will of Georgia citizens who voted, whether you like it or not, for Biden to be the victor in this state. And despite Brian Kemp being a Republican, Brad Raffensperger being a Republican, just like Republicans in other swing states, they're able to acknowledge the importance of respecting the democratic outcome of elections. And Trump, one of the things that makes MAGA what it is that identifier. That they identify their movement and say, if you don't go along with this part of their identity, then you're not MAGA. And you heard people screaming Rhino about Brian Kemp. And what is that identifier? Being willing to place Trump above our democracy and Constitution. And while someone like Brian Kemp is very conservative, and I have a bunch of issues with him, he at least can say we should maybe follow the Constitution a little bit. And that triggers Trump to the point where here he goes after Brian Kemp's wife.
So I did these two big rallies, and he won. He did win. He won by like 2%.
And we'll address the specifics of how this is so disastrous for his campaign after watching.
His wife looked at me and said, thank you, sir. We'll never, ever be able to repay you for what you did. You got my husband the nomination, and then we beat somebody who was unbeatable. She was, in theory, unbeatable. She was the hottest politician in the country at the time. Democrat politician, I would say I was hotter because I was president. So I was hotter than I'm only kidding, Marjorie. I'm only kidding. Although maybe I'm not kidding, actually. No, she was like the hottest, certainly the hottest Democrat politician in the country. And she was going wild for years. She's still going wild. She can't even believe it. But I got him by doing massive rallies. And I really worked hard. He's the most disloyal guy I think I've ever seen. But think of the wife. We can never repay you for what you've done, sir. We could have never won. And now she said 2 weeks ago that I will not endorse him because he hasn't earned my endorsement. I haven't earned her endorsement. I have nothing to do with her. Somewhere he went bad. And you know what? your numbers in Georgia are very average. Your crime numbers, your economic numbers, all of your numbers, you're very average. You can do a lot better, and you'll do a lot better with a better governor. You can do a lot better, just so you.
What a strange thing to say to a crowd. You're just average, okay? I don't even like you that much. No, and so before playing more, and he just was really fixated on this, but Brian Kemp, again, whether we believe this is justified or not, he is popular in the state of Georgia. And more importantly, what is noticeable about Georgia is that the Republican population does have a significant non-MAGA portion, which is what cost those 2 Senate seats after the 2020 election in the very beginning of 2021. That's what cost Trump Georgia. And that sort of Republican cost Trump the 2020 election. When you go back and look at the numbers of what contributed to Trump losing by the narrow margins in the swing states that he did, it's the alienation, just like we talked about with Kerry Lake and some of these MAGA figures, the alienation of the more moderate contingent of the Republican Party. People choosing to vote for Brian Kemp on the ticket, to vote for Republican Congress, congressional candidates, etc., but then to vote for Biden on the presidential level back then. And in this race, it'll be Harris, and it could happen again because of Trump's alienation of more moderate Republicans. And one of the quickest ways you can do that is attacking Brian Kemp like this, because it reminds people of the difference between their core values and Trump's. Sure, they might be won over by Trump's rhetoric when he's talking about other more conservative issues, but when he reminds them, I hate Brian Kemp because he didn't overthrow an election for me, boop, people remember why it's so important to vote for Harris, or some of them just will end up not voting for either candidate. And that could be, as it was in 2020, we know for certain, it could be what cost Trump the 2024 election. And it's all about this.
Now we have 2 things we have to do. We have to vote, and we have to make sure that we stop them from cheating, because they cheat like dogs.
And Trump's still very upset with dogs for some reason, but he wishes that every single Republican, otherwise you're as disloyal as they get, every single Republican has to buy into your election lies like the Democrats cheat like dogs comment. And then they can't just bolster your lies. If they have a position of power to do so, they have to be willing to actually facilitate an anti-democratic, fraudulent overturning of an election in their state if you ask them. I know that sounds, if you're MAGA and you don't want to live in the world where that's true, it sounds like it has to be hyperbolic. That's what Trump is pretty overtly admitting here. He said Brian Kemp wouldn't do anything, and because he's so incoherent, he sort of rambled around his point. But he's talking about 2020. He's talking about Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, and the people in other states not overturning the election results. And if you think that's acceptable for a presidential candidate, and at the time, the sitting president, to openly admit he wishes that people would put him above the lawful electoral process, then you don't really love one of the key things that makes America America, and that's really sad to me. Here's more.
That's great. And those 3 people are incredible. Let me give you the bad news. It's that for whatever reason, Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp, your governor, who I got elected, by the way. If it wasn't for me, he would not be your governor. I think everybody knows that. He's a very disloyal person, isn't he? Very disloyal. But these 2 are doing.
Even though, of course, as I previously mentioned, even with Trump's attacks against Brian Kemp, because of the more moderate Republican population in Georgia, Brian Kemp is more popular than Trump is. Again, a very strange political strategy there. And he keeps saying that word, loyalty. And MAGA, please come to your senses. You can have candidates that I don't like. Brian Kemp, for example, I don't like him on almost every issue except for, hey, let's have democracy. That one we agree on. And You can have candidates that still will own the libs and do whatever it is that you want. But you're choosing not just that, you're choosing someone who is saying, I don't like this person because they're not loyal enough to me. You don't want someone who demands loyalty to them as president. You want someone who demands loyalty of those they associate with to the Constitution, to the country, to our democracy. And with Trump's actions and then with his words bolstering them, he's showing it's loyalty to him above loyalty to our country. That's his priorities. Here's more.
Under these kinds of woke radical left policies, Atlanta is like a killing field, and your governor ought to get off his ass and do something about it.
And of course, anytime crime is brought up, we have to zoom out and discuss the record of the Biden-Harris administration, which is overseeing a plummet in crime, the likes of which you rarely see in the aftermath of a spike at the end of Trump's presidency, the likes of which you rarely see. Think about this. All the people who watch the show regularly, if you divide just the people who aren't subscribed, that group, if each and every one of you click the subscribe button today, we'd be instantly to 1 million subscribers. That'd be pretty cool. Click it if you haven't already. Thank you so much. Back to the video. Here's the former lieutenant governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, who's a conservative Republican, but is endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris for president because of the danger posed by Trump. And here's him responding to this.
But he also went after the sitting governor, who happens to be a Republican. Let's listen.
Your governor, Kemp, and Raffensperger are doing everything possible to make 2024 difficult for Republicans to win. Kemp is very bad for the Republican Party. He wouldn't do anything. He could have ended the travesty with a phone call because I did nothing wrong.
Kemp is your former boss.
We served together for sure. Brian Kemp has forgotten more about being a Republican than Donald Trump knows about being a Republican. Brad Raffensperger and myself included, we have done more for the conservative cause than Donald Trump has ever done. This is now starting to not be Donald Trump's problem. This is starting to be the Republican Party's problem. We have to call him out for what he is. He's a felonious thug who walks down the street and throws sucker punches at people like Brian Kemp, like African-American journalists, like John McCain, and the list goes on and on and on again. And the Republican Party is content sitting across the street watching it happen and not calling him out, not jumping into that fight and saying, you are wrong for us. This 10% in the middle, which now feels like it's growing to be bigger than 10% in the middle, that's going to decide this election, are paying attention. And I've never seen a human be more self-destructive than Donald Trump the last 2 weeks.
Wow. I've never seen a human be more self-destructive than Donald Trump in the last 2 weeks. And Brian Kemp did respond to Trump going on to rant about this more on social media, saying, my focus is on winning this November and saving our country from Kamala Harris and the Democrats. See, so he's still advocating for Trump. What? Brian, yoo-hoo, anyone home? Do you not see what's happening? Not engaging in petty personal insult, attacking fellow Republicans, or dwelling on the past. You should do the same, Mr. President, and leave my family out of it. So, this phrase right here, let's see, let me properly highlight that. Dwelling on the past. Often, dwelling on the past can be harmful. Often, you do need to get past the past. But when we're talking about someone who wants to be president now, or after this election, who's running for president now, who wants to take an oath to the Constitution to be president, starting in January of 2025, I think bringing up his past of trying to shred the Constitution in favor of his election lies and trying to get you in on it, and then him now dwelling on the past, saying that you're disloyal and he doesn't like you because you wouldn't shred the Constitution in his favor. Something you didn't use the word shred, but he said that he was just following the Constitution contrary to the request of Trump. That's what Brian Kemp said. So he acknowledged Trump was asking him to do stuff that was unconstitutional. And this is what's the point being made by Jeff Duncan. Republicans are to blame for this. I feel bad that Brian Kemp is being attacked, his family, in the way that we saw there from Trump, but also You're enabling this, Brian, by still saying Trump needs to win over Vice President Kamala Harris. Whatever your policy differences are with Kamala Harris, Mr. Kemp, Governor Kemp, nothing's more important than the upholding of our Constitution. And I know privately that Brian Kemp understands Kamala Harris would do that, and Donald Trump won't. And just to read you some quotes of Republicans responding to this, I'm sitting here scratching my head. Attacking the popular governor of a pivotal swing state makes zero sense. If we want to actually unite, ask for the support of the guy who beat your endorsed primary opponent by 52 points and handily defeated Stacey Abrams. Attacking a successful and popular governor is not only wrong, it's politically stupid. The stakes are too high for pettiness and for the candidate to actively undermine his own chances. And it goes on. He's just sabotaging himself, shooting himself in the foot. So while it's gross, I guess keep doing it because I want you to lose Trump. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. If you want to get extra content daily, you can do so by clicking the join button below.